Hey everybody, Side Hustle Seth here from More Than Dice. Time to talk about how to paint an army in 3 months. Questions about speed painting come up quite a bit lately, so we figured rather than do a painting demo, we're going to talk about the philosophy that means that you can actually get all of your models painted in that 3-month period. So, 3 months, that is an audacious goal for most people. If you're playing a small model count game like Guild Ball, or you're playing all Warjacks and War Machine, this seems a little bit more sane. Alright, so let's talk about 3 months to a painted army. This is really an audacious goal for a lot of people. You have set the bar high. So, how are we going to do this? Well, first obvious answer is quit your job. You do not have time to paint a huge army and, earn the keep that you need, put food on the table. No. You got time to paint. Of course, that's assuming that you were doing a army with a large model count, not something like Guild Ball, where you'll have a few figures, or War Machine or Hordes, and you're playing a list with lots of beasts and jacks. If you do decide to go the quit your job route, then paint 24/7. That's a great way to get things done. As you paint 24/7, you'll also discover that you can paint faster, and that means that you'll be getting more done as you're, dying of hunger. And you'll also get to mourn the loss of your hands as they shrivel into little claws. That will eventually happen. So some better answers. Paint smarter. This means that you go in with a real plan of how to take advantage of the time and the materials you have to get the high quality paint job that you want so your army looks good not only across the table but close to you. Second, take advantage of what the models offer, including that they come unassembled. We're going to talk about this quite a bit in this series. Today we're going to focus on that basing aspect because that's a great place to start. So now, a little bit of theory. Color selection. Think about this first. You want to push the contrast of any model, and the contrast between your base and your model is part of that. So if you've got a model with dark colors, you actually want a bright base. This acts like there's a spotlight on that model, helping it show up on the table. On the other hand, if you've got a bright model, something that's yellow or white, you want a dark base. That way that your model shows up against that dark shape. They don't get lost in it. Pro tip, if you don't want to play with contrast of light and dark, you can try pushing the contrast between saturated, that's those very vibrant, pure colors, and desaturated color. That's the colors that have had white and black added to them to make them more of pastels or more of a darker hue. This is a little bit tricky, and if you don't have a good understanding of color theory, I don't know if I would do this with an entire army, but it's something you could think about in terms of a single solo or something else like that. You also want to think about your material selection. On one hand, you can get pre-made resin and plastic bases, and this makes things go a lot faster. The detail's already there. You basically take them out of the package, give them a quick wash, make sure that there's nothing on them, and go. This can take 5 minutes. You can also go almost as fast if you pre-make all of your own bases. If all you want is a little bit of sand on a base, you can do that yourself. You don't need to get the resin or plastic bases. If you want something a little bit more complicated and you still want to go fast, those pre-made resin bases, those pre-made plastic bases can definitely help out. So here we go with a few examples. First up, from War Machine, this is the new Crix battle box from Mark III. We've got Agathea, the Warcaster, with some of her Warjacks. And this is a good example of dark models, the dark gray of the Warjacks, the dark gray of the armor of Agathea, with a much lighter base. The bases allow all of the detail, the full shape of the models to stand out. Even in cases where Agathea's glowing train of souls is pouring over the ground, the very darkest tendrils are closest to that very brightest base. And because we're using lighting techniques to keep focus on the eyes or on the faces of the models, you're not distracted by the base. You just get the clarity of the models themselves. On the other hand, you can look at this. This is Butcher 3, also from War Machine, along with his two crazy two-headed dogs. This is a good example of what you have with bright armor and a dark base. Dark doesn't always mean black. It can mean these dark grays with a lack of detail. We're not having our eyes drawn to the stones. We're still looking at the bright colors of the armor. We're looking at Butcher's face. This is another way to think about our basing. Alright, here's our pro tip in action. This is Sloane, Kara Sloane, again of War Machine, and her armor is bright blue, but it's been desaturated with white, which is why it is so bright at the edges. Her face also desaturated, bright clear, and as you move down the model, the colors become more and more desaturated, which means that there is less of the vibrant color and more black added in to create a darker hue. The base itself is made out of those same dark hues that are on Kara Sloane's skirt, so that rather than the face losing out to the brightness of the base itself holds up this very bright figure. Today we're going to be working on my army. This is part of my personal retribution army, and I want something that matches Alara 2 here. Now, her armor is fairly dark with dark purples, and her clothes are desaturated. That means that I want to get a nice blue-gray stone to accentuate what she already has in her armor. So let's take a look at how I did that. So we've got 3 months to paint our army, and we've got all these pieces and bits and bobs on our desk. Well, where's the bases? That's what we want to start with. Let's put all of this other stuff on the side for right now and think about this. Step 1 is set up for a lot of bases. The more bases, kind of the better, and we're just going to have them on the side ready to go. In this picture, on the top I've got 4 Micro Art Studio plastic base inserts with the plastic ring bases that they go into, and in the bottom right, a resin base from Dragon Forge Studio. I wanted to show how both of these paint up because they do behave slightly differently, but it's the same technique all the way through. And you're also going to say to me, but, Side Hustle Seth, there's only 5 bases. I know, and it's going to take me about an hour to do these 5 bases. But if I had 20 bases, it would take me about an hour. If I had 100 bases, it would take me about an hour and a half, and I know because I've done it. When you set up this way, you're going to be able to fly through these bases and not get stuck in them, but you'll still end up with high quality, clear, good-looking pieces. So this is a close-up on how I've set up my bases. I've got a piece of cardboard that I can do whatever I want to. I've got a couple pieces of painter's tape rolled into little loops, and I've got bases stuck to them. Because I've got everything in this format, I'm going to be able to fly through everything. It's close together. It's right there waiting for me to work. Step 2, prime them all. Now, someone's going to say, Side Hustle Seth, hang on, I can see through that primer. There is still some of that resin and plastic showing through, and I'm going to tell you that's not a problem. Primer is paint with very large particles that when it dries is a little bit rough, and that roughness allows our thinner model paints to stick to it. If you prime a model of any kind so that the primer is smooth on the outside, paint won't stick to it because there's no places for the pigment to settle. That's why I want that sort of rough texture, and that's why I'm not worried about the fact that some of these areas didn't get a ton of coverage. Plenty of areas in the recesses seem like they didn't get any priming at all. So step 3, I'm going to start with your strongest color. Because I'm doing a blue-gray, I started by applying a 50-50 mix of Menoth White base and Coal Black, both by P3. These mix together nicely and allowed me to get this solid color. You'll notice no base is showing through now. The primer has been covered completely. It looks great. More importantly, when I start with my strongest color, that means the color that's going to show through the most in the rest of the process. I'm going to go over those different highlights and different colors to create the gray part of the base, but I need to start with the blue here. So then I highlight up. I'm going to go back to my Menoth White base. I'm going to dry brush the whole thing. Dry brushing is wonderful for bases. If you're doing rubble, if you're doing sand, if you're doing stone, it brings out the texture. But you can't just do it once. Step 5, do it again. In this case, I've done it with Menoth White Highlight, and again, that color is starting to come in. In addition, make sure that you are dry brushing from the same direction, so you're creating a directionality of light. You can see it a little bit here on the medium base. It's a little hard to see on the other bases, but don't worry, we're going to get to that in a second. Step 6, time for a wash. Everybody loves washes. Washes come from lots of different companies. They're pre-made, but all they are is paint with a whole lot of mixing medium of some kind, be it water or thinner. What a wash does is what makes it a wash, which is that it settles into the cracks in a model. If you look at the models on the top row, the two on the left, I applied a wash very carefully. I painted into the creases, and on the two models on the top right, I just slathered it, and it did the same thing. Now, the medium base in the bottom right corner has a little bit more texture to it, so I started applying some of the wash heavily on top in order to prepare those stones for a cool special effect we're going to see in just a second. Step 7, bring back those highlights. That means you get, once your wash has dried, and that's very important, you get out your dry brush again, you dry brush again with your highlight, go straight to your highlight color, it'll come out nicely. In this case, I also did a little bit of two brush blending on that medium base in order to create a clear directionality of light. This is because I know what model's going on it. Step 8, details, details, details. This is where you're actually going to lose your time on your basing. If you look at the picture on the left, the top row, I didn't touch at all. I did nothing to them, and they look fine. The medium base, I did a little bit of marbling effect. I'll do a demo on that later, but it allowed me to give a little bit more character to that. On the right, you can see I put in just a little bit more time in that. The two bases on top have some sculpture that could be seen as maybe vines or maybe something else, and I decided to paint them up as if it was vine. I'm going to add some things later for that. I also completed the dirt on the medium base. This is also where I do my arc marks. Notice, I did the arc marks on the plastic rings, but not on the resin base. We're going to talk about why in just a moment. Alright, so step 9, place your finished models onto the finished bases. If you look at the picture on the left, I've got my beautiful Fade Night Guardian. I really like this guy. I've got a plastic ring marked with the arc, and I've got a base insert that just didn't work. And no matter how I tried it, I said I like this one, but it's wrong. On the right, I've got a plastic base that fits better. I've glued my model down. You'll notice he's missing his shield. Don't worry, it was intentional. And I want to be able to see where his shoulders are because that allows me to place the model exactly with the arc marks. Which brings us to basking in the glory of a finished model. The second half of part 9. Here we have two different views of the model. On the left, you can see how the arc marking is facing so that he has clearly a front and back. And on the right, you can also see that I've arranged this front and back because of the model itself. He's leaning a little bit forward with the shield. His spear, which is going to catch on everything, is pushed a little bit back. This model is ready for play. The base took almost no time. I am ready for my game. I hope you enjoyed this. This, again, was Side Hustle Seth from More Than Dice. Stay tuned for more hobby tips, as well as more strategies for getting done with a full army in 3 months.